Hi everybody, and welcome to week 8. This week we're going to kind of continue on with the conversation around feedback and actually go from looking at teacher feedback, which is what we were talking about last week, to looking at peer feedback and how to do that in classroom contexts. There were two readings. One was from Ferris and Hedgecock, where again they lay out sort of this blueprint behind peer feedback, looking at the history of it and looking at different ways in which it's conceptually considered. So from a very cognitive point of view, with, for example, Flower and Hayes and their whole, how they've structured the whole process approach to writing and how peer feedback becomes one of the steps that's involved in that sort of linear process. To social constructivist views, drawing on Vygotsky and the whole notion around sociocultural theory that looks at human interaction, how that actually has an impact on cognitive development. So seeing that peer feedback is actually very good for writers to develop a better sense of audience, purpose, as well as to internalize different aspects of grammar, construction, and style. So those are the two readings for this week. There's also a number of podcasts that I had on the syllabus. Two were actually from Nancy Summers, which were for last week, looking at teacher feedback, so hopefully you got a chance to look at those. Nancy Summers is the first language compositionist, if you will, who in the early 80s started talking about teacher feedback and kind of got the whole ball rolling on, how teachers give feedback, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, what's effective, not effective, so on and so forth. So it's very actually interesting to go back and listen to hear what she says about feedback and the different projects that she's involved with. The one for this week, which I hope everybody gets a chance to listen to, is a peer feedback project at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston, or in Cambridge, Massachusetts rather. And it's kind of interesting to actually get in there and see what the students see about feedback, how it's scaffolded and their impressions of it. And it allows us to kind of think about how we do feedback in our own courses, peer feedback, and maybe how we've been recipients of peer feedback and how that experience has been like. I'm involved with another research project that is actually going into elementary schools, or primary schools, if you will, and interviewing teachers about how peer feedback is working in their courses, and also interviewing students what their experiences with peer feedback have been, and getting them to talk about their writing and their revising processes. And this past week I was at a school in Toronto talking with one of the teachers, and although she likes peer feedback, she wasn't quite sure how to articulate the benefits of it and whether the students were actually getting anything out of it. So it got me the sense of thinking about, well, there are some assumptions that I have that I think peer feedback is great and it's very effective. But there's a sense that, certainly among many teachers, that they still question whether it's pedagogically appropriate. Lots of time can be spent on it, and the sense of, is it really valuable? Is it really a good enough activity to spend so much time on? So those are certainly questions that you may be thinking about yourself, or you've wondered about at some point in your own teaching experience or experience as a student. So I look forward to seeing what everybody has to say about that. I don't have an example of peer feedback with student commentary on it. Hopefully I'll be able to get some at some point. But that's something, if anybody has and they're willing to share or talk about, it would certainly be interesting to look at it and to respond to it. To think a little bit about the discussions for this past week, I'm glad that everybody got a chance to respond to that sample passage on globalization that was written by the student and the instructor's feedback on it. So the instructor was himself, he was multilingual and had been educated in various countries around the world. He was not an ESL teacher by any means. He was a content area professor in political science and diplomacy and trade and these kinds of issues. And the graduate program was all about those particular issues. But his feedback, as many of you said, and I think Peter did a really nice job sort of kind of deconstructing the feedback point by point. He was very abusive and I think quite frankly insulting and a bit violent. And this is not an anomaly. This stuff happens all the time. And I remember in my years of teaching writing, a number of my students would come to me with papers they would get back from their faculty that were just downright abusive. And one has to pause in these moments and think about, what is it? Of course, teachers are often overworked and there's lots and lots of grading to be done. And it's very easy to kind of go over the line and write things for you at the time seem to best represent the frustration that you're having, in looking at this text. And I certainly struggle with this myself. That's why I always write in pencil. Because I go back and look at the feedback that I write and make sure that I'm not saying anything that could be constructed as offensive or condescending or insulting. Because I know if I'm reading a lot of papers, I may get into a frame or a mindset where I get disappointed or frustrated. And it's clearly, I think, that happens with many of you as well when you're looking at student work. But the feedback that this professor gave in particular seemed uniquely mean-spirited and, quite frankly, very unhelpful. And I'm not sure where the pedagogy was in this moment. Where could that professor actually have stepped back and think, okay, this paper isn't ready to be assessed yet. So rather than getting myself frustrated and worked up, I thought, what he could have simply written is just a note at the end saying, to the student, I'm not ready to evaluate this paper. You need to work on sort of focusing your ideas. You need to integrate the sources from the other author that was part of the assignment guidelines. And you need to work on some of your structuring and organizational issues. That's it. A couple of sentences, which Dana Ferris recommends. If you're in a hurry, you can certainly do these endnotes rather than having to do the sort of the meta discourse of the marginalia. I don't think the student was quite ready for that yet. And this student probably would have benefited from a one-on-one session with the professor to talk a little bit about what he needed to do, set up some type of plan. And then if the professor felt he was not qualified enough to help a student with his writing, which many professors aren't, he could have gone to the writing center or made an appointment with me. I was also his writing teacher at the time, to kind of go over these things together to actually see that there's some learning going on from draft to draft. But unfortunately, these things like this don't happen very frequently. So things that we learn in the process. But as one colleague said to me a number of years ago, we can't learn without feedback. Feedback is one of those ways in which the instructor or what we get from our peers allows us to grow, mature, develop, gain insight, and think about ourselves as intellectuals and as writers. And so it's certainly very much a key component of the process, and how we do it and when we do it and why we do it are those particular issues that really need to stop and reflect on. So again, thank you for a great conversation this past week. Keep writing, keep adding as you go along. This week we'll move into peer feedback. And if you have a chance to watch the video from MIT, please take a look. I think you'll really enjoy it. So again, have a wonderful afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you guys online. Take care. Bye-bye.